Welcome to Rock and Blues Review, where today we're welcoming Canada's quintessential blues rock artist with the volume of work, the awards, and the live show demands to back up that claim. Welcome, David Gogo.
How's it going, eh?
It's going very well.
Yeah, I'm back on the coffee, and it's just I took about 25 years off, and it's just been fun, been nice.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. I did it for 4 years, and I tell you, I wanted one every day.
You
You?
know what? I was addicted when I was younger. Like I didn't get into it till I was maybe 19 or 20, but I guess when I first went on the road, and then man, it just became a thing. Like every town you'd travel to, you'd have to know like what's the hot coffee spot and everything. And then about a year after my son was born, I came home and I just didn't have a craving or anything. It was the weirdest thing. And then just recently, well, a couple months ago, I started again, and I love it. Anyways, we're not here to talk about coffee.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about this. You had your own podcast, um, Soul Bender.
Yeah.
Did about 64 episodes. Are you still doing it, or is that on
I've
hiatus?
got I've got a couple more that are actually in the can right now that I need to get out there. We just kind of I threw my back out last year and I had some health issues dealing with that, so I kind of just things fell off the rail for a little bit. But I've got in the can, I've got Alvin Youngblood Hart, I've got Ken Ham, I've got a few, So I want to keep doing it. It's just something that I wasn't traveling as much, and I just was just trying to recover. So it's something I definitely. It's not over, that's for sure.
Oh,
But
that's
I'm
good.
turning that exercise and that experience into my memoirs, and that's been the focus the last couple months for me. Is writing, starting to write my book about my crazy life in this business of music.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that specifically if the podcast had triggered that book.
Hmm.
Um, so, have you been keeping a journal notes all along?
Not really, but I'm a bit of a pack rat. And also, I'm just a fan as much as I'm a musician. I'm a fan. So ever since I got into this music at a very young age, I would collect things, probably starting with like just bootleg recordings of some of my favorite artists, way back before the internet when that was actually difficult to do. You'd have to meet other weird people who would give you a cassette that was recorded off a cassette, recorded off a cassette. Anyway, they get stuff like that. And then once I started meeting some of the artists, that was my thing. I just loved interacting with them. I loved, trying to get that whatever mojo I could from these people. So I'm fortunate to have quite a few photographs. Once again, pre cell phone, and everything. So and just get to know some of these folks. So there's a bit of a quite a bit of inside baseball going on in this book, especially with a lot of people that aren't around anymore. But I think it's interesting whether you're into my music or not. I'm not trying to make it just a kind of a name dropper star thing, but it's just my life.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Good for you for doing it because I've talked to a lot of artists and people who I thought should be doing it and they just haven't bothered. And I think that's a shame.
Well, absolutely. And during my podcast, I mean, I have a few people that were guests on my podcast that are no longer with us, and um, I'm glad I got them on, and got their story. But one person I would have really loved to have had and sat down, and I did sit down with him several times over dinners and stuff. But I wish I'd recorded it. Was Michael Fonfera. There's a guy that could have written a hell of a book.
Right.
But there's a ton of artists like that.
Yeah. You know, Watermelon Slim had kept extensive journals. And one time when he was here, he mentioned that he was writing a book, but the guy who he had helping him bailed, disappeared. And my wife, who's a pretty good writer and editor, offered to help, and they had one meeting, discussed it. It didn't go any further. So he's another guy. If you ever sat down and talked to him, what a character he is.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've met him a couple times. He really is. I mean, that's the guy you'd want the video version of the book just to be able to watch him tell his story.
Yeah, because he's so different than he looks.
He's a real far out dude. He's a character.
Yeah, and Mensa apparently.
I wouldn't doubt that. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's just say along those lines you got so many people that you've worked with, and I had Colin James on a few couple months ago, and
Hmm.
he talked about his Stevie Ray Vaughan experiences when he was young, and you have Stevie Ray stories too from starting out.
I do. Yeah. I've talked. Well, I kind of met Colin back in those days, you know. And him and I have talked about that a little bit. What a fantastic experience it was to get to know such a, you know, obviously he was a brilliant artist, but just a really cool dude. I know that him and Colin were great friends, and Stevie was the same. Like I was just saying, you know, as much as I'm a musician, I'm a fan. Stevie was the same way. The last time I chatted with him was kind of funny because I was just kind of starting to find my way in terms of becoming a professional musician, and it was both a month before he passed away. So you know, he'd obviously been he was on tour with Joe Cocker at the time, but you know, we were during the sound check going around looking at. He was showing me these different guitars and how he changed his setup, and I realized that he was just as much of a fanboy as I was at that moment because he's like, "Wow, look at this Strat." You know, Eric Clapton gave me this Strat. He was so proud. He was like this little kid, you know. So, yeah, Stevie, man, it's hard for me to believe that he's been gone as long as he has been, you know. And but you know, guys like Colin and you know, I see young fellas now that weren't even born when Stevie passed, and they're playing his music. So it's quite a legacy.
Yeah. Actually, I saw that tour with Joe Cocker a month before he died. So
Yeah.
I'm glad I got to see it, but yeah, so sad. And it's interesting you mentioned those. 'Cause I was talking to Matt Schofield a while ago, and he
Oh yeah.
mentioned so many guitarists his age that we all know who born around 77 who were so inspired by Stevie Ray. That group seemed to really latch on. They were young teens, I guess.
Well, it's you know when I talk to younger players nowadays, when I happen to mention that I knew Stevie, you know, slept on his hotel room floor, that kind of shit, um, I could just see the look in their eye. It's the same look that I had when I was a young person and I would talk to people that knew Jimi Hendrix because I looked at Hendrix the same way, you know. Jimmy was a guy. You know, Hendrix was. I was 2 years old when he passed away, so I never got to obviously see him or play with him or anything. But yeah, I mean, I would just I sit there and you know listen to people talking about Jimmy, and people the same way with Stevie. I mean, Stevie was only 35 when he passed. Man, it's incredible to think about.
Yeah. Well, and I think you share a kind of a legacy with him, and that, yeah, he kind of revived blues rock in the States, and I think, you did that to a large part in Canada. So good job.
Well, thanks. Colin, James, Jeff Healy, you know, they definitely had more success than I did. It's in some ways, but you know, my first album, even you know, in Toronto, we got really good airplay. But the funny thing was, the record company I was with at the time, they were really trying to push me as an artist that I was not. You know, they're trying to make me like this grunge guy or something. I don't know, but I'll never forget that it was is it Q107's the big rock station in Toronto? I think so. At the time, they were playing our version of "It's My Own Fault," like a 7 minute long BB King blues, because they could hear it. They had realized that that's what I was about. So that was kind of cool. There was no kind of hiding my influence or my roots, and you know it was kind of valid to do that at the time. But you know now, 30 years later, it's kind of cool that you know I just kind of did the music I wanted to do, and I continue to do that. You know, trends be damned.
Yeah. And that was an interesting thing. It was about what, 1994, and as you mentioned, you were doing your thing, and you were getting a lot of airplay. You were almost poised to be this rock star, and yet if you listen to that album today, it's blues. There's no question.
Yeah, you know, and it would have been more blues if it had been left to me and the producer Rick Parasher. Unfortunately, Rick's not around anymore. Um, but at the time, I mean, I have demos from that era, and you know, not that we were against rocking out. I mean, I was a young man in my early 20s. You know, we were recording in Seattle and hanging out with Blind Melon and Pearl Jam and all those people that were just in the area. You know. Um, but Hendrix was also from Seattle, and there's you know Ray Charles and Quincy Jones, man. They spent a lot of their formative years in Seattle. So and Jimmy lived in Vancouver for a lot when he was a child. I met Jimmy's dad, Jimi Hendrix's dad, one time, and he told me how Jimmy and him, you know, lived in Vancouver and even on Vancouver Island for a while.
Right. Yeah. And unfortunately, that wasn't a great experience. I know you and I talked about that once before about your experience with the record company at the time. And you weren't the only one. I've talked to other guys who've had the same kind of experience with their record company starting
Yeah, but like I say, at the end of the day, I'm still here. They're not.
out. Yeah, none of them are anymore.
Oh,
Uh, so when you were young, did you set out to be a rock star? Were you thinking that way when you first got into it?
I didn't think about it really in specific terms. I just wanted to play music and get out there and do gigs. It was just so exciting to me. I don't know what it is. It's like that Warren Zevon thing. You can't start it like a car, and you can't stop it with a pistol. It's just it's always been in me. I talked to Tom Wilson briefly about this once, and he just looked at me. He goes, "Go, you're like me. We have no choice. Like we just have to do this." So I'm sure that everyone wants to be successful, but to me, it was just a matter of where's the next gig? What kind of do I have an extra set of strings for tonight? What all that kind of stuff. Very much in the moment.
Yeah. Well, and again, you bring up something very interesting there. You mentioned I saw, I think it was one of the podcasts actually. You were talking about when you were starting out, you weren't that concerned about writing, but now you're doing a lot of writing, and that's essential, I think, if you're going to be, your own star. You can't be a cover band.
Oh, absolutely. And it's strange because some of the biggest artists in the world never wrote a song. Like Elvis Presley never wrote a song. Which is odd. But I guess he was just an interpreter. Yeah, songwriting when I was younger, because there was so much great music already out there. I would just wanted to learn that, and play that and turn people on to, say if you never heard of Magic Sam, you never heard of Albert Collins. Well, I want to turn you on to that. But you're correct in saying that, they can only take that so far. You could, be the best cover of blues band in the world, but once you get outside your city limits, you find out that every town has one of those. So songwriting is something that has become much more appealing to me, especially in the last, say, 20 years, and especially in the last 10 years. Um, During the pandemic, I got a little more serious about it because I had no choice. I was at home. And then doing a record like Silver Cup that I did with Steve Mariner producing, I think there were some good songs on that. But I think, yeah, that's what separates you from the pack is if you've got some good songs and if you've got something to say. I mean, in the genre that I write within, sure, there's going to be songs about chicks and all that kind of stuff and on the
Chicks and
road,
cars.
chicks and cars, but no third world war. But
Yeah.
well, maybe these
Yeah,
days.
maybe.
Um, but like on my last record, I have a song about the Moose Hall, which is my little watering hole down in South End, Nanaimo, about actual incident. I wrote a song about a guy that was just a bit of a rounder around Nanaimo that was in, we'd gone to the same school and stuff, who passed away. He was a bit of a local legend. And, so, keeping, not necessarily just Canadiana, but just, personal stories and a personal connection. I think that can help too. But there's nothing wrong with writing about chicks and cars because that's, a big part of what I do.
Yeah. I think it was Son House, not positive, but he said that blues songs had to be about love, and I don't think that's necessarily true.
Yeah, there can be got a few about hate, I think. Well, it's funny, those blues boys, they BB King told me once that men and women, and he's speaking strictly in a heterosexual way, I guess, but men and women can never truly be friends because they secretly always want to be lovers. He says you might have a woman who you think is your friend, but one day she'll just get up, walk over to straighten up a painting on the wall or something. You'll look at her. You look at her in a different way. So
Yeah.
they were sly old dogs.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, let's go back to the Silver Cup album for a second because that's very interesting. There's a lot of stories right in that. The song "Never Gonna Change," written with Tom Hambridge, and when you did it, produced by Steve Mariner, but uh, it was done by Buddy Guy.
Yeah, that song. Tom and I wrote that with Johnny Winter in mind, actually, because at the time of writing it, Tom was about to go into the studio to produce a record for Johnny, and he knew that I had been on tour with Johnny quite a bit, which I had. And so we said, well, let's write a song for Johnny. Tell me what he's like. Tell me about it. So I started just writing down little notes and little, some of Johnny's peccadillos and things. And for whatever reason, they didn't end up recording a song. And then a few years went by, and I got an email out of nowhere from Tom saying, "Hey, give me a call." And he said, "I'm in the studio with Buddy Guy. They're looking for material. I played them that song. They loved it. We just recorded it. I think it's going to make the record." So that was one of the great thrills in my career. And when I listened to Buddy Guy's version, I just thought to myself, "Wow, this sounds like we wrote the song specifically for him." Like lyrically, it really sounded like it was written for Buddy Guy. And then as I listened more, I thought, actually, it kind of sounds like I wrote it about myself, maybe here, or maybe Tom and I wrote it about ourselves. So I did my own acoustic version. But what a thrill to Buddy Guy's one of my all-time musical heroes. And to have him record something that I helped create was, I mean, that's a real feather in my cap.
Yeah, for sure. And Tom Hambridge, what a guy he is. Like, he was actually my first guest, my podcast
Oh
first
yeah.
guest. And he's an amazing guy. And not that many people know him, which is really astounding if you look at his resume.
I haven't talked to Tom for a while just because he's such a busy fella and everything. But we had the way we met was kind of strange. When my first album was released, we had got a tour to open for Joe Satriani in the U.S. Some big rooms like the Beacon Theater in New York City, and a bunch of soft seaters. Man, it was a big deal. Except that our drummer at the time decided to not fill out his immigration forms properly and got busted. And so we actually couldn't perform the first at least one show, possibly two. Satch's drummer Jonathan Mover volunteered to fill in on the third date. I mean, what a great guy to do that. Anywho, when we showed up in Boston, we had a road manager at the time, and he said, "Okay." And again, it's getting close to showtime. I'm like, are we going to have a drummer or what? And about an hour before showtime, he goes, "Meet Tom." And it was Tom Hambridge. And I said, "Hello, Tom." And I had no idea who he was. This is like 1994 or something. So this is pre him working with Thorogood, pre Johnny Winter, pre Buddy Guy. I think he had just worked with Susan Tedeschi. Anywho, I goes, "Hi, Tom. I'm Dave. What's the last gig you did?" And he said, "Well, I just got back from a tour of Japan with Bo Diddley." I said, "Well, that's a good start." And I said, "Well, we're just going to play the blues." Like, we didn't have time to play him any of my songs or anything. We just set up and played the blues. And he did, the next 3 or 4 shows opening for Satch with us. So he was obviously a real team player, and really helped us out in a unique situation. So, it was kind of a unique bond that we had that, has now led, he's one of the, I'd say he's the most successful blues record producer in the world.
Yeah. And well, he started at the top. He got hired out of college. He didn't even graduate to drum for Roy Buchanan.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Tom's a real talented dude. I mean, I was first aware of him. There was a radio station out of kind of just over the border in Washington State that we get pretty good here in Vancouver Island. And when Susan Tedeschi's first record came out, they played a lot more kind of rootsy stuff back then, even though they were a commercial rock station, but they were independent. 92.9. And but they played that first record of hers, and that was that Just Won't Burn, I think is the record. And I went, what the hell is this? So I checked that out right away, and Tom was a big part of that.
Yeah.
Both from Boston, I believe.
Yeah. Well, like you mentioned, successful. I mean, he's got 4 Grammy wins on 11 nominations, and Stevie Ray had 6 wins and 13 nominations. So
Yeah,
award wise, they're close at least.
yeah,
Now, what about Steve Martin? What a great guy he is too, and you've been working with him quite a bit lately.
yeah. Steve's a pretty special guy. That's why they give him that parking. No, he I guess I met him through my buddy Tony D, because I've known Tony D for gee whiz. I probably met Tony when I was 18 or 19. I'm 56 now. And so, once they formed Monkey Drum, plus Matt Saab had played drums with me with my Ottawa band for a while. So, it's a not a huge scene. So I was aware of Steve when he first started out playing with J.W. Jones. And in the last, say, 10 years or so, we've become really good friends. And he's produced my last 2 albums, and we're already discussing doing another one next year. He's just a really, I mean, obviously he's a super talented dude, but I just trust him in the studio, and I trust him on the stage to kind of guide us to where what's going to sound good. And he's had me do some things that I was maybe, I'm not sure if I wasn't didn't think I was capable of these things, but maybe I just didn't want to try. But there was, certain things that he got me to do when recording, whether it was vocally or guitar wise, or many different ways. And I just kind of sometimes I would just give him a sideways glance, like, "Are you sure?" But that was the big thing about being in the studio, was being able to trust someone in those situations, and that's happened. And we just get along as well. Like we're in touch, every couple days, just seeing what each other's up to.
Actually, I chatted with him this morning because he's in St. Catharines Wednesday
Oh yes, that's
with Colin.
that
Yeah,
beautiful venue there.
yeah, it's a nice one, and it should be a good show. It's the acoustic trio, so looking
Right.
forward to that. And just getting back to the book for a second, are you getting any help with that? Or you got an editor, and when does it expect it out?
Well, the big thing is to get it done. So that's why I realized, I gotta spend some time at home, which is good because this time of year I try to stay home here on Gogo Mountain anyways, because we've got our family Christmas tree farm. So I want to be around to pitch in on the weekends with that. But that's perfect during the week. So I'm trying to write a certain amount every day. Um Editing wise, I think the biggest part for me was trying to figure out the format. I have a friend of mine that I've known. God, we went when I think we were 14 years old, and she's gone on, through academics and works at the local university and the library, and she's edited a couple books. So she's going to help me out with that, with the technical stuff. But when I sent her the first couple chapters, she was, once again, you have to be able to trust someone in these situations, and she's someone I've known, all my adult life and beyond. So for her to, she doesn't have any reason to blow smoke. And which, so for her to say these stories are great, there's hardly any editing to do. There's a couple minor grammar things. So that's been nice. But I spoke with Greg Godovitz, I spoke with Miles Goodwin, I spoke with Will Miller, who are all musicians that have written books, just for advice. And the biggest advice was just fucking do it. Just get down to it. Don't try to edit as you're writing. But that's the nice thing about writing in these modern times is I can look things up. Like I'll go, gee, what year was that festival that oh, Salmon Arm Blues. So I just punch it in. What years did David Gogo appear in Salmon Arm? Usually it's true.
Right.
Um, or just contacting people. Like when we talked about Stevie Ray Vaughan. So the first time I really hung out with Stevie, Waylon L. Walker was the guy that actually brought a chair over, put the chair at the side of the stage. I was 14 years old, and he said, "Have a seat, learn something, son." He's really friendly. And I thought, oh man, I got to include that. Then I was trying to remember. No, was Al playing with his band, or was it the Wailing whatever's? And so I just found him on Facebook, and hey Al, what was the name of the band? And blah blah blah. So that's a nice thing to be able to just do it yourself.
Right.
But there'll have to be some kind of a disclaimer, just saying, hey, these are my memories. If you got a problem with it, fuck, too bad.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, but you must. Well, can you share any? I don't want to, give away too much of your book, but can you share one of those crazy stories?
well, I've read so many musicians' biographies and autobiographies, and my favorite by far recently was, I think it's called "Waiting on the Moon." It's Peter Wolf from Jay Giles Band, and it's exactly what the kind of book I want to write, because I feel that once again he's just as much of a fan as he ever was a musician, and he seemed like we have a similar thing. Like when he found out the Muddy Waters was going to play in his hometown when he was a teenager, his thing was not only how do I get in there, as an underage person, how do I get in and see the music, but also I want to meet that guy, and I want to have a couple drinks with that guy, or whatever. So, that's and it's not really like a I was born a poor young black child, and then I did. It's there's not this curvature of a story. It's just like anecdote, anecdote, anecdote. So I'm going to mix them up. One of the silly ones that's not really musical per se, but it's musician's life, was I used to have this old gray van that we would tour in. I mean, mostly these days now we rent or fly and blah blah blah, just for practical terms. So back in the day when you could actually go out on the road for a couple of weeks, I had this old gray van. So I had this mechanic, this shade tree mechanic, old Dale, he was a character himself. There's been books written about him, but that's literally another story. But after every trip, I take my van to old Dale, and he'd just, give it a look over and make sure keep us on the road for another week. And one day he was frustrated, and I said, "What's going on?" He said, "Well, you've got some kind of a fluid leak happening, but I can't, I just can't find it." I go, "Well, show me." And so he's looking. He goes, "All the hoses are fine, all the clamps, the this and the that." I go, "Well, why is there, what's making you think there's a leak?" And he goes, "Well, look." And he takes me to the passenger side of the van, and all down the side of the van, there's this corrosion happening in the paint. And I said, "Oh, I know what it is." And he said, "Well, you're no mechanic." I said, "No, I'm not." And I said, "But I know my keyboard player, and he always rides shotgun. And every Sunday when we come back off the road, he spends the entire drive rolling the window down and puking out the passenger window. And it was been so consistent that it was actually eroding the paint off the side of my van.
Jesus.
He's dead now.
Oh, he's now you told me a story once before about a keyboard player who got you in trouble with George Thorogood. Is that the same guy?
Oh, perhaps. That's a great story. That's a great story. That one too. So
Well, we won't tell that one today. We'll
yeah,
save that for the book. It is a good one. I would. That's a very good story. But you mentioned Satriani too, and another thing. So I'm gonna question you because you have answers to this that I don't have. I saw Satriani once do an interview, and while he was had a guitar in his lap, and everyone was they were asking him to play like Clapton, play like Buddy Guy, play like Jimmy Page, and he could do everybody. And
yeah.
to me, that was just amazing. If you can sit there and mimic the best players in the world, certainly you have to be one of them. But that's different than doing your own stuff. So, as a guitarist, as a peer, what's the difference between as uh, somebody who's mimicking and someone who's making their own path?
Yeah, that could be a fine line. Albert Collins always told me that you have to have an ID, your own identification. So I very much agree to that. With that. I mean, God, I mean, Albert Collins of all people. I mean, what a unique style he had. But it made me start thinking about that, and I remember as a young guy, I was heading downtown Nanaimo to go see some music. I just got off the road. I didn't know who was playing, but I parked my vehicle just up the street from the local music venue and got out of my car, and I could hear a band playing. Okay, then I hear a bit of the guitar solo, and I thought, oh, that's my friend Michael. And I could tell right away, even though I had no idea who the band was, and he was sitting in with someone else. It's not like I recognized the song, but I recognized his style, his playing. So yeah, that really got me thinking. And you know, when I was really learning to how to jam with other musicians and everything, in high school, I was in this weird thing in the '80s there where a technique had just come out called tablature. So all the guitar magazines, this is when heavy metal was coming out, and finger tapping and finger. So it was this tablature, which was kind of like a paint by numbers technique of learning how to play. You're just basically playing by muscle memory, and it had nothing to do with music. So I try to sit in with these various artists, like, hey, let's go to the band room at lunch and jam. I go, well, let's key a G, and they'd stare at me like, what? Like, they had no idea. To them, it was just like it was something like a weird, like a whack a mole game. You just got to remember what these things are. So it's very strange. So I think if I have any kind of a recognizable style, it's also through laziness. I was too lazy to learn Stevie Ray Vaughan solos note for note. I was too lazy to learn Eric Clapton solos note for note. But I tried to get the essence of those things. And I think the only artist that I really like went, okay, I'm going to learn this note for note would be Albert Collins. But that was more of in tribute. We cut one of his tunes from my Skeleton Key record, one instrumental called Backstroke, and I was just basically a tribute because Albert was my hero. But yeah, I mean, yeah, it's what that's what perplexes me about this current trend. I mean, there's always been top 40 bands, but now the big thing now seems to be these tribute acts, and I don't know,
Mm,
man. I just don't get it. I don't fuck. It's been done.
yeah, and that topic, I mean, I think it's come up on every podcast I've done. It's come up again and again, and I don't want to dwell on it again, but I mentioned it before. I fear for new original music because what if the bands from the '60s acted like that? We would still be listening to Pat Boone tribute bands.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
So,
absolutely. So I don't like yeah, do a song or maybe two songs in your set, but don't base your whole fucking thing on it. And but there's that being said, there's some great younger acts coming out that have some really great songs.
right, right, right. Yeah, no question. And I guess we got to take. I think it's more the music business that's making it tougher. And you mentioned that signature sound and hearing it, and when you're playing a couple cover tunes, which I think is important. It kind of sets a bar for people. They know where you're at. You know,
Sure.
in an international blues challenge, they want you to do one or maybe two covers, maybe, and I think that's why, so they can hear it. And when I was talking to Gordy Johnson, he said, as long as you've got that core melody in there somewhere, then you can go off and do what you want with your solos and everything else.
Yeah, well, I've covered songs on just about every album I've done, but I try to do it in a kind of a unique way, kind of try to blues it up, whether it's Tomcat Prowl by Doug and the Slugs or The Way
Mm,
You Make Me Feel by Michael Jackson or Personal Jesus by Depeche Mode. Those are all songs I've covered but turned into blues songs
right.
because I heard the essence of the blues in those songs and
Yeah.
just tried to bring them out.
Oh, there's no problem with that. I love Joe Cocker, and let's face it, you know, he was the cover band.
Yeah, man. Well, I saw Leon Russell at a neat coffee shop just outside of Ottawa in Calabogie. I don't know if you've ever been to that venue,
Uh,
but it holds about 100 people, and that's it, man. And so everyone would pay $150 or whatever for a ticket, but you get to sit there in a tiny little room and see Leon Russell. That was fantastic.
right. Well, let's talk about your new album. Oh yeah, it's doing really well. You're getting lots of attention. I see it everywhere.
Yeah, that was such a fun record to make. I really let myself go in terms of getting out of my comfort zone. Most of my albums I've recorded in Nanaimo with kind of the same people, with very few exceptions. But kind of mid pandemic, Mariner and I did Silver Cup at my house, so that was an acoustic record. It's just basically him and I. We have a couple guests here and there, but when it came time to make the next more like a band oriented album, I was ready to make another step. So I didn't want to just fully jump without a without a net, or a parachute. So I went out a couple of months before we did the record, and I was in Ontario for some other things, and got together with Steve Mariner and Jimmy Boskill at the original location of Ganareska Recording Company. And I had about half a song written. Showed up with that. We wrote the rest of the song together and recorded it. And that was my the way of okay, can I work with these guys in this capacity? What's the facility like? And blah blah. There was a lot of things. When I record close to home, all my guitars are here. Like I know all the people. So this was something different for me. But that song, which was you used to mean so much to me, and ended up on the record. That was a very successful experiment in just like okay, let's try a song. Let's see how it goes. So the actual album was so great because by then they had moved out to just outside of Coburg to the house that they house the studio in now.
Right.
And so it's an old farmhouse built in the late 1800s that's kind of in the middle of nowhere. So there's no one bugging you. There's not like that'll happen sometimes if you're in a recording studio that's well known. You get past clients showing up or just other distractions. But this is like literally the middle of nowhere, and I kind of stayed there and played there. And you get Gary Craig on drums, Jimmy Boskill on bass, and various other instruments, and Steve Mariner. You got a pretty good band too.
Right.
So that was a fantastic experience. I had got the COVID just before we went out there, so that set me behind about a song and a half. So when I showed up, I wasn't as prepared as I usually am, but having those guys there to kind of punch things up was just the icing on the cake. So it was fantastic and definitely an experience that I would and have recommended to other artists. Go in there, get that
Right.
experience. Yeah,
Yeah. No, that's great. And it's great. It's doing so well. Getting a lot of attention. Juno nominated.
yeah, and the songs are fun to play live because the album itself was recorded very very live. I mean, with Mariner tricked me a few times. I mean, we'd be recording what I thought were a ghost vocal, and he'd go, "Okay, we got it." I go, "Okay,
Right.
so what? When are we going to record the real vocal?" No, that's it.
Yeah.
So right on.
Well, good for him. Good for you. Like I said, I'm glad it's doing so well. We got about 2 minutes left here, so I'll just say, uh, I think there's a one thing. One, you got a lot of awards, and one that you have that nobody else has, and that is the Canal Bank Shuffle Underwear Award.
Yes. Well, I actually those photos showed up the other day on Facebook somewhere, and I just look at those moments with great pride and fondness.
Well, and I think there's a sweeter side to David Gogo that maybe you don't show too often, and that was, Marion and my wife presented those underwear to you, and you were very sweet to Marion when she was very sick and brought her in a dozen yellow roses, and that was very cool of you.
Well, you meet so many wonderful people on the road. You meet a few arseholes too, but you meet a lot. You meet a lot of and people like her. That they give so much. They volunteer at these festivals, and they're just so helpful. And I'm sure they have to deal with a bunch of bullshit. And it's just nice to get to know those people and try to acknowledge them when you can.
Yeah. Yeah, and she was a big fan, as most people here were. You were at the Canal Bank Shuffle a number of times,
Yeah.
and hopefully you'll be back. Brant Parker has kind of revived it, and he's trying to build it back up. So
Yeah, I saw that. Well, losing Tim must have been just such a huge thing to it was to us as musicians. Obviously, he was such a great guy, but I'm sure just for the whole thing down there, because he just seemed to have his ear to the ground all the time about what acts to bring. And I know he traveled to down to Memphis and did all that stuff. So I mean, I did the festival. Not only was I in the festival, but he was very helpful in if I was going to be coming all the way out from Vancouver Island to go to the Maple Blues Awards or the summit, he'd make sure that we'd do the guitar awards with me and Jack
right,
DeKaiser and organize things like that, which are so helpful for a guy like me that has to travel to come out there. So yeah, I hope to get down in that area more often again, because I got kind of spoiled for a few years there.
yeah. Well, hopefully they'll get back. And no, you're right. I mean, Tim was a big loss because he did know everybody, and he cared more about the musicians than anything else. But that was smart because everything fell into place. You look after the musicians, and the show takes care of itself.
Yeah, and I got to see a lot of artists that I might not see because just geographically, and the fact that he could bring them up. So like trying to think here, Cedric Burnside,
Right.
is it Johnny Rawls? People
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, those are the real cool acts that just I probably wouldn't see out here on Vancouver Island.
Right. Well, like I said, we're almost out of time, so I will thank you for doing this. It's been a pleasure, and I know we'll see you again soon, and all the best.
Thank you so much, and you got a lot of likes when I posted with credit the photo you took of me. I'm trying to remember. I posted it. I can't remember if it was this year
Oh,
or last year.
oh, right, right. There was one this year, but yeah,
A live shot. Yeah.
I got lots of you if you need any for your book. Lots.
Okay. Good.
Even the underwear shot.
Excellent.
Take care.
Thanks, Bob.